Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rahil, and I run Unbound's content from our Singapore office. It's a pleasure to be in London. It's only my second day, and I've had fish and chips, so I'm good. We have a great panel for you today discussing one very simple yet important topic: the rise of Asia and the change of impression from manufacturer to innovator. So a wonderful panel here. I'll leave it to them to introduce themselves.
Okay, my name is Peter Chun. I'm the CEO of Accenture Asia. We basically like the accelerator, tech accelerator based in Level 39, Canary Wharf. And we basically decided to go to one of the very high potential markets in Asia right now. So we're setting up the office as a head of our operation facilities in Asia, in Seoul, South Korea, now expanding to major cities, including Singapore and Taiwan, and then Taipei and Taiwan and Hong Kong. So we're trying to focusing on the fintech and smart city solutions in the future.
Wempy?
Hi, my name is Wempy Koto, and I am the CEO of Wardour in Oxford, and we're a management consultancy firm working with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, as well as startups to profitably expand their businesses internationally.
Good afternoon. My name is Swatton. I'm the UK Marketing Director for ASUS, and I head up all the PR, marketing and branding, and retail marketing for our range of smartphones, tablets, laptops, all-in-one PCs, and desktop PCs. And we've done a lot of great innovations over the last 10 years, and I think the next 10 years and beyond for Asian companies, there's some fantastic innovation I think that's going to come to market.
Steve?
Hey, hi, I'm Steve Leonard. I work for Singapore government. I'm building an organization that is focusing on bringing researchers that would like to build companies and entrepreneurs that would like to work with more research-based professionals. And we're bringing those men and women together with investors, and we are doing that as part of a multi-year plan to build economic value in Singapore and beyond.
Hi, my name is Jatin Detwani. I used to work for Rocket Internet as a CFO for Asia Pacific region. Now I've just moved to London, very early days. My role included making new investments in the region and looking after our portfolio in the Asia Pacific region.
Okay, so that's who we are. So I'm personally very happy. We have the government, we have hardware, we have startups, we have management consultancy. So I guess to you, my esteemed panel, my first question is, where are we right now? What is the state of Asian innovation today? Just any one of you, just go.
I'll take that one. I think we are at a very exciting and interesting stage, and the fact that we are having a panel here talking about it and devoting 45 minutes, 6 people, and so many people in the audience actually demonstrates the importance. I think a lot of exciting things are happening. The theme in general in the APAC region is not anymore or always to imitate things from the West, though my former company is not really known to innovate a lot, but we innovated a lot in execution strategies, operation strategies, and other strategies. So I think it's very exciting, it's very interesting, and I think it's a long way to go, and it's everything in the right direction in my view.
I think the title says it all. I'm a big believer. I've lived in Asia 16 years. And as far as I'm concerned, anybody that thinks Asia is about imitation doesn't know what Asia is doing today. So my belief is China is hugely innovative, pouring billions into R&D. Same thing is happening in Indonesia. Same thing is happening in Vietnam. Same thing is happening in lots of different markets, including my home market of Singapore. So I think if people imagine that Asia is about low-cost manufacturing, they're out of touch with what's currently going on.
So I mean, that's the perception that we get a lot, that oh, let's outsource stuff to Asia, let's send it to Vietnam, let's send it to China. They'll make it good, they'll make it cheap. But do you think that there's, towards innovation in Asia, there's a stigma attached to it?
I just think it's historical overhang. I mean, I think the idea that somehow innovation occurs in some Western country and then moves to Asia to be low-cost manufacturing is a historical artifact. and there's still low-cost manufacturing, but it's moving around. So if you want low-cost manufacturing now, you don't necessarily look to some of the other markets. Way back when, it was Japan, then there was other markets, then Korea, then China. But now if you really want low-cost manufacturing, you have to look at lots of different places, Myanmar and some of the faraway, less developed markets. So I think it's just that sometimes people think of it as it's far away, that's what I know, and they don't update the record. So if you go and you take a look at what's happening with medical technology in China, my view, China will be a huge market leader, market maker for pharmaceuticals, med tech devices, a lot of research there. I think it's just an inevitable outcome. So my big message is, it isn't about imitation. I think there is huge original IP development, and it's just a matter of people getting up to speed on what's really happening. Go and spend a couple of months or years in Asia, and you'll come away a believer.
So how closely linked is the rise of Asian innovation to the rise of China? I mean, anyone? Yes, it's you, Steve.
No, I'm reluctant to keep commenting on it. It's just, I think the scenario is I spent 15 years building software and hardware companies in and around the China market. There's lots of things to worry about in the China market, but there's huge opportunity. So again, I've lived through that curve of, is there something imitated? Is there something originated? So I've lived through the used to be cost, then it was about getting access to amazing engineers. So now China is definitely a locomotive that's pulling lots of other parts of Asia along, but also other parts of the world. But ASEAN is 650 million people. We were chatting before we took the panel. Indonesia's doing amazing things. Vietnam has some of the most outstanding software engineers anywhere in the world, apart from saying it's in Asia. It's just that people don't understand. I want to repeat myself that some of the VCs with whom I work in California and elsewhere say, gosh, it's a long flight. And the answer is, that's true. But that's where a lot of action is.
Rahil, what I'd like to do is just rein back the discussion because I have a more moderated view of Asia and innovation. That may differ from yourselves, respectfully differ. Firstly, I'd just like to clarify my definition of this phases of innovation. Firstly, at the bottom level of the pyramid is importation. And that's where a lot of Asia is still actually at right now. Now, let's note that Asia as a terminology, right, is singular, but it is not homogeneous. Asia is very, very different. Japan, South Korea versus Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Indonesia, very different. So firstly, Asia is not homogeneous. And at the bottom rung is importation, where a lot of deep technology and high technology is being imported into Asia by these markets. The next level really is imitation. And that's when we are taking the successes of the US, as well as Europe and the UK, and we're just simply transferring those technologies and those successes into Asia. And that's where a lot of, whether it's sophisticated hardware, software, technologies, it's all being, a lot of that is being imitated in Asia also. Then the next level above that is really the innovation part. And that innovation part is where things get a lot more sexier and a lot more interesting. But innovation is significant value added to what previously existed. And the word innovation gets bandied around a lot, but I think it's important to understand that innovation is actually a deep, intellectual, rigid, and complex process. And then the next level on top of innovation is invention. And I don't know of one outstanding, extraordinary of modern times, an Asian invention that has just really changed the course of humanity. Yes, there has been some prehistoric,
numbers,
slightly ancient ones, but what has Asia created, like the World Wide Web or the telephone and those sorts of significant inventions, which I hope to, which hopefully can happen in our lifetimes. But I think it's just important that I just wanted to clarify that firstly. But yes, there is a mark and there is a distinct link between the rise of technology and the rise of China and Asia as a continent.
So picking up on that, when you talk about the web, that's 50 years old. So if you take a look at what the work was of the US government in helping build ARPA, and ARPANET. So I don't disagree that there's things that have already occurred, but it's hard to timestamp something that occurred in the US decades ago and say, what's Asia done? So I think it's a matter of, let's have a good discussion 10 years from now or 15 years from now, because I think we're comparing apples and oranges.
And just to add to that, I think it's partially true that there is no big or extraordinary invention that has come out of Asia, which has changed the world. But I would say there are a number of, whether you call it inventions or innovations or betterment of an existing idea or a product, which has changed the lives of millions of people across the globe, which share the same demographics, same income levels, same conditions as some of the parts in Asia. A lot of inventions have come out of India, China, Philippines, which are targeted not towards maybe people at the top or the middle of the pyramid, but at the bottom of the pyramid, which has gone to Africa, which has gone to other parts of Asia, which has gone to some parts of Latin America, and have really changed millions of lives. And there are, I think, a countless number of such inventions or innovations, whichever way you put it. So it's partially true, but I think this is also important to know what is happening around in that area.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the, if you're trying to understand the basic level of innovations in Asia, is somewhat different, probably a lot different from here in the UK and also Silicon Valley, United States, because mostly we just deal with the fintech and smart city. In Asia, even in, we're talking about Taiwan, South Korea, China, Singapore, everywhere is talking about the regulations and also existing big powers trying to not be controlled by the innovative startups or any entities from the West. So basically, it's really hard for us to be launching our facilities and operations in Asia, is we need to fight against the government, or maybe we just convince the government, municipality government and foreign governments to change their mindsets, why they need to deregulate fintech, or why they have to do a lot of things to make it smarter with the cities. The thing is, every startups, I think I say maybe a majority groups of startups in Asia, they are afraid of going abroad. Most of them, they're focusing on domestic market to fighting against the existing, the big players. So what we're trying to do in Asia is trying to get them have more chances outside of their local. So the thing is, if you take a look at as a big vision in Asia, is too highly potential, and even Indonesian startups can even initiate their businesses in China or in South Korea, even maybe North Korea, but they see only potential markets, but they don't know how. So it's basically one of the points that any startups from the UK or Silicon Valley can tap into any kind of possibilities to have the opportunities there. So that's what we trying to build up the platform for them to mingle them together in a platform. So we're just talking about it's too far, right? I took a flight from Seoul right now, like last night, actually yesterday morning, 14 hours, 15 hours, jet lag a couple of days, and it's really hot here. But it's physically it's impossible to mingle them. So the thing is, we're trying to open the gate with some areas in Asia, like for example, we have Level 39 in Canary Wharf, and we have also the Seoul Accenture Hub, and Hong Kong and Singapore, in Kolkata, in India, just like that, trying to exchange them. Like we just set up a program like a Go West and Go East programs. It could be one of the things we just believe in.
Yeah, actually, Wempy used a very interesting word earlier, homogeneous. There's this, and like he rightly said, that there's this impression that China, India, Southeast Asia, it's all one market. But I mean, is this a damaging thought to have?
Well, let's look at it. Okay, let's look at Asia as a continent. Firstly, we can look at it in terms of countries. Yeah, we can divide it according to Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, China, Japan, etc. And that makes it not homogeneous, right? Now, the next part also that I actually feel is a better way to reflect on Asia is just the diversity of religions, for example, right? When you look at the Muslim market across Asia, where a lot of innovation, a lot of tremendous innovation is happening in the Muslim market, that cuts across about 240 million Indonesians, as well as 20 million Malaysians, as well as Singaporeans, as well as some Thais, as well as Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and those sorts of markets, because ultimately, governments create borders, but religion erases them, yeah? As in the same way that entrepreneurs erase borders too. So there's a lot of innovation happening on that front. There's a lot of innovation that's happening on, on country fronts also. But your question was in terms of homogeneous.
Yeah.
There's nothing homogeneous about Asia also. And there seems to be a lot of high-tech innovation coming in from the north, such as Japan, Korea, and China, but a lot of imitation that's coming in from Indonesia, as well as Vietnam, etc. That Silicon Valley, successful startups and companies from Silicon Valley as well as Europe are being transplanted into Southeast Asia because they have MVPs, they have validated products, they have monetized already, and so it's easy to transfer those startups there rather than create new unvalidated startups.
So exactly. So Jatin here, you were from Rocket. The whole business of Rocket is venture building. So what would you say your experience was taking companies from the States and here in Europe and transplanting it to smaller markets within Asia?
So I think it's a bit misleading to say Asia is one market or one continent, even from a startup innovation or new business perspective. The way we typically looked at it, and I personally believe that's one of the right ways to look at it, is there is a developed Asia in terms of the ecosystem of startup, innovation, new inventions, or new business models. There is an emerging part, and there is a frontier part, or we call it as a frontier market. So developed is, I think, very easily definable. Countries like Japan, Korea, to some extent Singapore, India, China, they have, I think, very well-established ecosystems of startups where things are happening. Then there is a developing part or an emerging part, which is, I would say, entire Southeast Asia, excluding maybe Singapore. And then there is also a big part, which is a frontier market, which I think a lot of people outside of Asia are not looking at, let's say, as closely as the potential might demand. So there are markets like Myanmar, which just opened up. There are a lot of opportunities in Myanmar to do a lot of different stuff. There is a huge opportunity in a country like Pakistan. Fourth largest, if I'm not wrong, fourth largest country by population after the US. I didn't know for a long time, to be honest. A lot of potential is there. And then if I go back to Rocket, we have 5 different businesses in a country like Pakistan. We have 5 different businesses in a country like Myanmar. So I think this served us well to have these 3 different segregations, and each market has its own challenges. And I would say within these 3 markets itself, with due respect, I think there is nothing called Southeast Asia as a single market. All 7 countries are very different. There are some similarities between Malaysia and Indonesia on the basis of religion, on the basis of some of the cultures, but still I think there are a lot of differences between how things work in Indonesia versus Malaysia versus Vietnam versus Myanmar, and Singapore being very different from all the other markets. So that's how we looked at it, and then we decided which market is right for going into first or in the second phase.
So what was the strategy for just go in and see what happens, or take time, look at each market, study different metrics?
So I think traditionally the model has been the former. Let's go there, let's build a product, let's build a team, let's see how we can scale it up quickly. But I think over the last few quarters, things have changed a bit. Many of these markets have become much more competitive. A lot of capital is flowing into these markets. The great ideas or very brilliant ideas, I think, are going down as a proportion of the money that is available for investment. And there is always some smart money, some not so smart money, which is also flowing into the system. So I think in the last few quarters, the approach is more of the latter. We take a little more time to think about how the economy and how the startups are growing and how we can go and really build a successful business there.
So come back around. I mean, today in 2016, there's some Asian brands that have become cool. I mean, DJI from China, ASUS from Taiwan. So, Shifa John, I was wondering, would you say that today there's a changing perception towards Asian brands from, oh, it's an Asian brand to, ooh, it's an Asian brand?
I think there is, but I think just going back to kind of the innovation, the kind of grassroots of what creates innovation, you look at the recent, the PISA kind of benchmarks, which is internationally, if you like, scoring 15-year-olds around the world on their educational qualifications on the disciplines of maths, reading, and science. And the 7 top countries for maths globally now are Asian. The top 2 for reading are Asian. The top 4 for secondary science are Asian. The Taiwan government a decade ago was investing in the institutes of design and sponsoring them to increase the pool of homegrown talent. So I actually think you're seeing an acceleration of innovation, and that's only going to really explode over the next decade, because as these 15-year-olds start coming through, going to better universities, and the universities in Asia improve, and the homegrown talent improves, the numbers of innovations that come from Asian companies will help change the perception and awareness of Asian brands. So I know, for example, ASUS, we focus very much on the customer experience before specification. So there's no point in having the fastest, the most reliable device if the customer's not going to experience that user experience. And that's throughout Asia. So the ethos, the concept of bringing innovations to market is changing. So I think a lot of Asian brands have done some fantastic things in the last decade. But I think, watch this space. I think over the next decade and beyond, you'll see certainly an explosion of, if you like, cool brands and cool products and cool innovations coming to market.
I guess, how about the Asian ethos? Because, back in the day it was, we're a Western company, but we have an office in Asia, so we have that Western ethos. So now it's the other way around. So using ASUS as an example again, how does the company retain, actually even for the rest of you gentlemen like Steve, how does that Asianness sort of become a part of innovation in your business? And let's go for it.
Sorry, missed that. How does Asia, what?
Actually, that was more for John. John,
Yeah.
the Asian ethos for ASUS, yeah. John.
Okay, so sorry, we spent a lot of time with new staff and also internally discussing what's important in terms of our heritage, our brand, where we started. We started 27 years ago, and I know Johnny Shi, our chairman, one of his phrases was sharpening your sword. So it's essentially looking at where you think you can make the biggest impact and then putting everything into it, whether it's your technology, your service, your design, being very, very disciplined and knowing when to say no. So if you invest a lot of time and effort into a product or an idea or an innovation that's not going to work, then you've got to either solve it very quickly or cut your losses and change. Now, for a hardware manufacturer, that's kind of quite, it's pretty much unique. A lot of companies wouldn't, they try and find a way to solve that, but you have to be brave and decide when enough is enough. So internally, keeping that the Asian culture, Asian ethos, it's kind of difficult. We're moving offices tomorrow, and all of our meeting rooms will be based on places that are meaningful to ASUS. So Taipei, Beitou, Guangzhou, and our corridors will be named after famous roads in Taipei as well. So both physically and mentally, we try and retain some of the aspects of kind of our Asian heritage in our office.
I think one thing that's, I think this is a vital point also, is that one thing that's driving Asian innovation is that oftentimes only Asians can solve Asian problems, because we're living in the dimensions of the geography every day in our lives. Let me give you a case study, is that there's a company called Gojek in Indonesia.
Right, fantastic company, yeah.
Yeah, it is. So they are essentially the Uber of motorbikes in Indonesia. So we have heavy traffic jams in Jakarta every single day. like literally the city stands still, and productivity is shaved by about 40% on a daily basis, simply because traffic kills people. 2 hours or 2.5 hours back and forth to the office every day. So what Gojek does is that it is essentially Uber, but with motorbikes, because the only way to get from point A in town to point B in the other town is to slide through the traffic with a motorbike. So yes, Uber would come into Indonesia with a car solution, but it would take Gojek to really rethink it and say, you know what, in our dimensions, a car wouldn't work, but a motorbike would work. So that is really just, it's Asian problems, it's Asian people solving Asian problems, essentially, and that's what Gojek does. Another interesting startup that's come up from Indonesia also is a startup called eFishery. And Indonesia, being a maritime country with 17,000 islands, the fishing industry is a huge industry for us. And so what's been discovered is that fish don't act and react like human beings do. We have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Fish don't have or don't need breakfast, lunch, and dinner. However, science has proven that when fish actually get hungry, they release particular acids, and they swim very fast in their hunting mode, right? And so what a company, startup called eFishery does is that freshwater farmers have their mobile phones, and whenever the fish release particular gases, they're notified. There's a detector, and they're notified on their mobile phones, and then they automatically feed the fish at the particular times that the fish are particularly hungry. So there are the Asian innovations are coming up because we are living in those particular, that particular geography. And there's another startup called CI Agriculture. And what they do is that because Indonesia and Southeast Asia is largely agrarian also, is that they send drones out instead of the traditional means of farming with rice paddies, etc. They send drones out to check out the humidity of the soil, also to check out if it's ready to be harvested or what sort of stage we're at by using that sort of technology. And then after that, the farmers being able to make the right decisions that are less intuitive but more scientific. So there are a lot of startups that are being developed simply because it is called for by that geography, that potentially an American in New York they wouldn't come across that particular problem on a daily or regular basis.
So coming back to that, there are various, what I like to call soft skills, like fintech and all in China that, frankly, we just came back from Guangzhou, and the wallet doesn't exist in China. You have your mobile phone and you have WeChat, and everything is paid from that. How would Asian companies sort of take those kind of innovations and bring them here?
Do you want to go?
Can you just repeat that question again?
There's certain innovations that Asia has pioneered, stuff like, especially in regions like fintech, big data. How would it best be brought here to the West?
So I think there are some innovations or some business models which are very specific to Asia, as was pointed out. So those I think are difficult to bring. But I think there are a lot of different business models. You may not call it as innovations, but different business models that can be brought in here. One on the fintech theme or on the theme of the wallet, right? I think that can be easily bought in any other market if there is a player who can consolidate all those different parts of the ecosystem. And if we not only focus on the West or the developed part, so I would say then there are a lot of models which are actually being replicated and taken from Asia to other parts of the world which are more emerging and more developing, Africa being one, Latin America being another, and I spoke about it earlier. But I think in the West also there are a lot of different models that can be bought in.
But I think the important point, I think the important point here is it worth bringing?
Right.
I think there's a key point here, which is not everything from somewhere has to go somewhere else. So Gojek works in Indonesia for the reasons that we just heard. it wouldn't make the same sense in a different market, but it's perfect for some other markets, maybe amazing in different markets like Cambodia or somewhere. But the scenario that I would offer is WeChat and the payment model that Ant and others have been pursuing, Alipay, is because there was a gap in how China was dealing with different personal finance. So if you were going to a bank and trying to think about something called a check or a credit card or things that are more prevalent in other markets, and then you have this little movement forward called Apple Pay, it's just not that big a deal to take the payment system in China and try and bring it to North America. One of the things that we're always trying to argue with our startups is do something that's worth solving, right? Solve a problem worth solving. Don't solve an incremental problem that somebody has already solved and you're 2% better. So I co-chair the FinTech office for the Singapore government, and we always spend time taking a look at FinTech startups. And a lot of times we say, really? Is that important? Do we need another version of that? So part of what we're trying to push back on is, what's a problem worth solving? And then let's put effort and resource behind solving it versus there's a slightly different color screen or a slightly different font. So our big goal is take out friction, but do it in a problem that's worth solving. Gojek was solving a transportation problem that had a huge economic benefit. That's a problem worth solving. But it's not a problem worth trying to have 14 different versions of a payment system that isn't solving a problem. Underbanked, unbanked, that's a big problem in parts of Asia, in some countries. So that's a problem we're solving. A slightly different payment system. So that's my view on that one.
I might build upon on Steve's point, actually. So the scenario in many countries around Asia, particularly in the less developed part, is that 90% of the population does not have bank accounts, right? A huge number of Indonesians don't have bank accounts. You all have bank accounts at TSB or Barclays, HSBC, etc. A lot of Asians do not have bank accounts because they are part of the informal economy. So one of the innovations that has come through from China, actually, is one called Sesame. So what Sesame does is that they provide credit score rating. Yeah, and with that particular credit score rating, with about 700 or so credit scores ratings, you might be able to pay for a cab ride thereafter. Or with an 800 score credit rating, you'd be able to get a visa to Europe without applying, because they know that you're worthy of particular, you're financially worthy. So, and there's a lot of innovations and ideas and technologies that is best transferred and transported from Indonesia, Vietnam, or Southeast Asia, Thailand, etc., to Africa, rather than to Europe.
Actually, adding on that about the platform, we're talking about fintech. Payment systems are all different. The culture basically big obstacle for the startups doing something different, because they're losing market credibility issues and also lots of issues as well inside. The thing is, we're just talking about Alibaba's big success and also Alipay's success. Basically, Alipay, and we're talking about the iPhone, like the Apple Pay and Samsung Pay. All those payment technologies and startups behind a big ecosystem of e-commerce. So the beauty of the benefits, huge benefits in Asia, comes from the size matters. The size of the markets, and which is basically a lot of efforts to boost up the new ecosystem of e-commerce. Then payments follows naturally. Then that's one of the things that every single market they understand. So we've seen a lot of startups in Asia, like in Singapore, we're talking about. They are trying to build up kind of the segmented e-commerce area to cover entire Asia. So for example, one of the cases in South Korea, there's a company called Jikbang. It's
E-commerce.
e-commerce. The young people, they're looking for the house. It's very expensive living in Seoul, like in London. So they are basically looking for the better price to seize the rooms for maybe 1 month or a couple months. So, but the classical way is really expensive. They have to just pay a lot of premiums to the people. So this kind of new the platform of the sharing the prices, better prices for the, the people looking for the rooms and the house, and it's kind of this big, the e-commerce for things and other things. I'm not really quite sure about the Western culture too, because the people in London, they just love to go out, to hang out and eat, but Korean people, they want to stay at home to deliver service. So delivery service in Korea is huge. I think probably 30 million people basically delivered food monthly basis. So this kind of the business model is huge. So still, the 4 or 5 different companies in just dealing with this kind of business online is very successful. We don't call it it's like high tech. So it's mid tech or low tech. It's still boosting up because it's basically based on the different culture. It could maybe probably Steve knows about the Honeybee, the e-commerce for the delivery service of the grocery store.
Yeah.
And even Uber started out with the Uber Eats, right? So the e-commerce will be probably just bringing a lot of big changes in the next couple of years with the fintech. So fintech with e-commerce will be very strong, the platform in the future, I think.
Thanks. So of course, for any startup ecosystem to work, the flow of capital is paramount. So the big question is, how can VCs and investors based here, how can they work with Asian ecosystems, Asian startups, Asian governments to best gain value? Go for it.
Great question. I guess the important part of Asia is that you cannot have an ivory tower approach to it. You cannot be sat at Canary Wharf or the city and then have reports coming in from Asia every few months or so. You've really got to parachute yourself in, I believe, for about 6 months or so and really invest time before you invest any sort of money into the ecosystem. And by just this whole sort of sensing process and understanding what are the problems in Asia, you'll be able to figure out which startups are creating the best solutions for Asia. And with that particular flow of capital, obviously seed stage is always the riskiest part, but always the smallest part also. But I would really look to startups that are validated already and that are monetizing before really considering investing those particular startups. Because that's the tough part. There's a lot of great ideas, but can they monetize? And that's the big question.
I think it's already happening. There's been UK angels that have come from UK, now live in Singapore, are PRs or permanent residents there. There's European angels that have moved. So there's already people that have decided to go and make something happen, because some people tend to be early. If you're somebody that wants to see how the thing goes, getting over there, I think to Wempy's point, is a good strategy. And the people that were there 3 years ago are now riding the bow wave, which is the amount of money that's in flow in Southeast Asia, or also from Singapore into other markets, has increased by a huge amount, from small hundreds of millions to well over $1.5 billion, approaching $2 billion. So there's been a big increase because some of the people that said, I want to get out there and try. Government matches a lot of funds. Singapore government matches a lot of funds to help people get jump-started. So if anybody's interested in it, there's a really easy step, and that is go to the internet, because there's lots of publicly available information about what is available. If you look at Singapore, I'm only talking about Singapore for the moment, there's plenty of other things that are available in other markets too. But there's a lot of investors that are putting money in Indonesia from Singapore, in India from Singapore, because they like some of the structure, the rule of law, the transparency, some of the things that they feel comforted by, but they can deploy their funds into a variety of markets. So it's not terribly complicated, and the Monetary Authority is trying to be very open to foreign funds and foreign investors that want to come in. So I don't think it's a difficult thing. It's just a matter, like anything in life, if you're interested in it, get on a plane and go over there.
Steve, you should be the ambassador for Singapore.
I am. I love Singapore. I think Singapore is an amazing place, and I think Singapore has all the assets and capabilities to build globally relevant products. It's just that we don't sometimes because we say, gee, we're not as big as so-and-so. And the answer is, so what? You can build important things as long as you're working on important problems. Right. Our challenge historically has been great research, great education. Some of those rankings that you talked about, Singapore kills it in terms of being number 1 or number 2. Primary school, secondary school, tertiary education. So it's not a lack of education, and it's not a lack of research dollars, but what we're not as good at as we would like to be is saying, okay, what's a really big, ugly, difficult problem I can solve? Let me go do that. We tend to have VCs and others that say, what's a really good 18-month in, out, and so can I build something off that? And the answer is probably not, because the people that built other companies didn't do that. I mean, if you take a look at semis and transistors, the guys that built the companies that built Apple, the companies that led into the products for Apple, didn't build things on an 18-month exit. So unfortunately, we're in a little bit of a loop that says, what's the lowest hanging fruit that we can pursue? And that's where money tends to go, and that's where people tend to go because they see the money, and part of what we're trying to do is say, okay, we're not interested in that. Somebody might be, but we're not. But if you want to work on energy storage, if you want to work on future of healthcare with precision medicine, you want to work on self-driving vehicles, because Singapore can bring policy, legislation, all these things that government can do to make it possible, that's what Singapore can do.
Speaking of Singapore, and Singapore, the country Singapore is not democratic country, right? It's basically...
I totally disagree.
Yeah.
It's
actually, the...
Totally disagree.
as a born and bred Singaporean, it is.
Let me tell you a little bit about the
disagree
kind
when
of...
people say it's not democratic. There are democratic elections. There's multiple parties. People can choose whoever they like. I think that's false, so I have to say...
Yeah, they restructured a little bit this, most recently about, they have very centric policies to, comparing with the South Korea has multiple agencies and ministry level. They have kind of a common visions and missions to invest like a double, triple, the investment at the same time. For example, any startups overseas like a Silicon Valley and the European side, they actually get a lot of fund from South Korean. We just say it's not very smart fund, but it's huge. Probably $1 billion they get from Silicon Valley. Thing is, the ministerial level, they compete each other. But the efficiency way in Singaporean government, they don't. They're totally different. They're very centric. They are very well-organized system they go for, because they don't have to compete each other. That's kind of a different government structure to support the systems. They want to just get this done much more efficient way now. So we basically working with the MAS and Spring to build up the smart city platform and fintech. Only the UK government, FCA, is talking about RegTech, regulation, tech, and sandbox, a couple of years ago. Now, I think probably Singaporean government, the first country out of UK talking about RegTech. If you actually ask any countries, the government with the regulatory offices, they never know, they never stated on that. So that's one of the things that I can...
Yeah, so Singapore is a democratically elected government, and that's just a statement of fact. So the scenario of being efficient and all the other things that go with the Singapore brand shouldn't be conflated with this idea of democratic or not democratic. I think the important point about FCA and MAS, there's a harmonized regulatory structure. So the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK and the Monetary Authority in Singapore have harmonized regulations to try and make it easier for fintech companies that are operating in both markets. Same thing between the Singapore government and the Australian government, and there's 2 or 3 others that are currently under negotiation, trying to make some of that regulatory friction between governments in pursuit of startups less.
Can I just add one important? I just want to build upon Steve's as well as John's points about education in Asia. Sure. The only thing that will really kill Asian innovation is our Asians itself. And why I say this is simply because of our mentality and mindset about starting up and entrepreneurship. It's quite core to the Asian family that you complete your high school education, you go to university, you may do your master's, but then after that you work for a big consultancy company like McKinsey or a HSBC or a Bain, because that gives you the business card, that gives you the address on the main thoroughfare, that gives you prestige. And entrepreneurship is often relegated or assigned as something that maybe dropouts to, or maybe, you know, class B or class C. And so that Asian mentality of face, of image, of wanting to, you know, go from there to there, to, you know, from university to big corporate world, that needs to cease and that needs to absolutely change, because that is what's going to kill all these intelligent Asian kids who are great at mathematics and engineering and science from moving into corporate world, into the startup world, which is where I believe great innovation can actually happen. It can happen there, but it can, I certainly believe it happens beyond the borders of corporate world.
And just to add to that, I think that's a very important factor. The other factor is the Asian culture, or in many countries in Asia, which is called losing the face, or accepting failure as a part of your journey towards achieving something. I think going back a few years, failure was supposed to be a very bad thing to happen, and nobody wanted to even accept it even after it has happened. But from my eyes, I think things have started to change, and there are some good role models, whether it's Alibaba, whether it's some people in India, some people in other parts of Asia, which have failed multiple times, but now have achieved something which is very, very big than even talking about or thinking about their failure. So I think that's an important part, which I don't think will change overnight or in the next couple of years. I think it's a slow, gradual journey from first being, you know, taking out the mindset of working for a big company always, and then second, being ready for, you know, accepting failure, taking it as a learning, and then using it to really do the next thing better, and not stopping unless you really find the success, or whatever success means. It doesn't have to be really always financial.
Okay, and on that note, guys, I think we're out of time. Could I please get a round of applause for my amazing panelists?